Hello, students, and welcome to Chapter 4, Writing in the Media Environment. I'm just going to give you a brief overview of some of the highlights in the chapter that Stovall goes over and maybe add a couple of my own experiences so that you can understand writing in the media environment a little bit better. Know thy audience, right? We certainly have bosses where we have our editors and our publishers, but the audience, they are a version of our bosses too. Because when we write for the mass media, we write for a mass audience. And sometimes the audience is broad for major newspapers and magazines, for example, the New York Times and the Atlantic. And sometimes the audience is more specialized, for example, the Philadelphia Inquirer and Cat Fancy magazine. Or it might even be more specific, for example, the Philadelphia Gay News, the Philadelphia Tribune, Al Dia, the East Falls Local, etc. So the audience of those publications has certain expectations. And as writers for the mass media, we have to meet those expectations, but also give them new content that helps them navigate the world we live in. We, as journalists, and writers, we're always wrestling with what our readers want versus what we think they should know. And I think this goes back to the debate of sensationalism that happened in the early 1900s, where sensationalism stories about like drugs, celebrities, scandals, sex, etc., kind of dominated the headlines because the publishers wanted to make money. They wanted more eyes, right? But what we want to do as serious journalists is we want to engage with the audience, not with sensationalized content, but with content that helps them understand their daily lives. For example, right now it would be about gun laws, right? Um, we're always trying to make the information interesting, um, but also taking ourselves as seriously as possible as reporters. The news culture, right? When we write for the mass media, we are part of a long history, sometimes good, often good, and sometimes bad. We learn from the successes of those who came before us as well as those who have failed, right? So in the mass media, we provide information in a variety of forms. The information that we find is key to what we do, no matter how it is delivered. Every media platform is filled with content. This is true for social media as well. Information, content is our bread and butter, right? And what we want to do is we want to develop a name for ourselves, and we want to have that audience that we've addressed to trust us. So in order to develop trust, we need to deliver accurate information, right? Look at influencers, right? How many influencers have ruined their careers because they have been deemed no longer trustworthy? The information we deliver also needs to be delivered efficiently. There is so much competition out there for eyeballs. Eyeballs means money for advertising, for advertisers. Um, so we really have to be excellent, right, in what we do, and trustworthy in order to gain those eyeballs in order so that we can make money for either ourselves or for the organization that we work for. But we also have to have integrity. According to Stovall, quote, an individual's commitment to honesty, fairness, and ethical standards should be strong, and the writer's confidence in the corporation standards should be well placed. What it means by that is it means that not only do we need to be ethical, but we need to work for an ethical corporation. For example, I once worked for an unethical public relations firm. I lasted a month. I couldn't do it because if I continued with that firm, no matter how much they paid me, my reputation as a journalist would be ruined if I continued to work for that firm. Same thing with TMZ. Nobody who works at TMZ is going to go out and get a job at the New York Times. At least I don't think. I kind of hope not either. Accuracy. These are some of the general things you want to check. Of course, you want to edit your work as much as possible before you deliver it to the next editor. Hopefully, then it goes to a copy editor, and then it goes to your section editor, and then it goes to the main editor. So there's a lot of different steps. But before your story goes to the next step, you want to make sure that you spell all names correctly. You want to quote your quote sources correctly and double check those quotes from whatever recording device you used. You also want to check it out. You have to use multiple sources, especially for controversial stories. If one person says one thing, you want to try to get confirmation from another source, whether it's a document, another person, etc. Then you want to do the math. Double check all numbers and dates. So many reporters have made very serious mistakes by not checking the dates. For example, there was once a reporter for Yahoo Finance who said that Delta Airlines was going out of business based on a press release they saw. The press release, and so what happened was as soon as they printed that story, everybody sold their stock in Delta, and Delta started going back. The press release was actually from, 10 years before, um, and they actually came out of bankruptcy. So anyway, you always have to check those numbers and dates. Verification and attribution. All the major facts of the story should be attributed. This is true for radio. This is true for television. This is true for print. Now, those facts can come from a press release, interview, observation, or document. The only thing that doesn't need to be attributed is observation, right? But so, for example, many times we get a lead for a story from a source. For example, a woman calls the newsroom to tell you that a contractor is dumping trash at the end of the street. You, as the reporter, need to confirm and verify this information. You can't just print a story saying so and so claims that this contractor's, um, is dumping trash at the end of your street. It's your responsibility to go verify this information. So what you do is you go to the scene, you call the construction company, you interview a worker, you interview other neighbors, you call the Department of Licenses and Inspections and see if the company has any complaints about them. You go to the online court system at the city of Philadelphia. You type in the company's name. You see if there's any lawsuits against them. You need to verify this information, and once you verify it, it needs to be attributed in your story. Every quote, every fact needs attribution. So, a couple of news writing basics, no matter what form you're writing for, right? We want information, not opinion. For example, the textbook says it's a great day to get outside versus it is 75 degrees and partly cloudy. Let the reader make the opinion about for themselves. We don't want to make the opinion for them. We just want to give them the information. You want to use short sentences, short paragraphs, short stories, right? There's so much competition, again, that we want to keep that story actually as short as possible. Take out all unnecessary words. Take out all unnecessary quotes. You just want very basics of what the reader needs. Clarity, coherence, and context. You want to put information in a clear order. And then you want to give context when necessary. For example, we have the quote, "The neighborhood surrounding Temple has experienced a building boom over the last few years." It's an okay sentence, right? But what would add to that sentence would be specifics, right? You then say property values surrounding the campus have soared 60% since 2000, according to Zillow.com. It's a fact, it's attributed, it puts into context the previous sentence. Now, another basic that you're going to have is deadlines. This is changing a little bit because of the web. Like, what is the deadline on the web? As soon as possible, right? But most editors want a story done by a certain time. For breaking news, we always want to be the first, but we have to make sure that information is accurate. And we talked about that a little bit before, about how that can ruin your career. You put out a story before you have verified the information from another source, and it can ruin your career if you haven't. Elements of news, these are similar to the assignment you did with Shoemaker. Impact, timeliness, prominence, proximity, conflict, the bizarre or unusual, currency, right? So you want to make sure that whatever story you choose to do, for example, sometimes you walk into the newsroom and your editor tells you to do a story, right? That's usually what happens. But sometimes they say, I want you to go out and find a story. Therefore, if you go out and find a story, you need to make sure that that story has at least some of these elements of news, or else it's not going to be a story that they're going to want to print. 6 basic questions you want to ask, right? And that your audience is going to ask. Who are the important people related to the story? What is the major action or event of the story? When did the event occur? Where did the event occur? Why and how did the event occur? Those first 5 questions, you want to answer them actually in your lead in a single sentence. But at the very basic, the bare minimum of your story has to answer all these questions. And just like with English 102, when you write a research question, when you write a research paper, you ask a research question. Keep these questions in mind when you're interviewing sources, when you're looking through documents, or whether you're going to observe a scene. Reporting, right? The best journalists are the ones that find information that other journalists can't or don't find. The best reporters sometimes aren't the best writers. The best reporters are ones who go and consistently find, excuse me, information that nobody else has found. You need to be relentless in your desire to find information that makes your story come alive. If that means calling somebody 6 times a day, call them 6 times a day, and email them, and message them through Facebook. Do everything you can to get information from that person. So reporters generally find information in the 3 ways. Observation. Go to the scene or event whenever possible. A lot of reporting gets done in the newsroom, through email, through phone calls, but whenever you can get to the scene, go to the scene, right? Observation also doesn't need to be attributed. And those good reporters, they use a lot of observation because it's them going out and seeing what's happening. People. People make your stories come alive, right? Interview people, follow the guidelines in the textbook, use quotes and paraphrases, and make sure they're attributed. One thing that always shocked me about being a journalist is how willing people were to talk to me, whether it was the person on the street, or whether it was Ray Charles, or whether it was Mayor Ed Rendell. People are willing, they want to get their voices in the media. They want to tell their stories, right? It's your job to get that story out of them. If you want a really good example of somebody who does this really well, then I would listen to Fresh Air with Terry Gross. She's one of the best interviewers, and she's right here in Philadelphia. She's based out of WHYY, right downtown. So I would listen to Terry Gross as well as follow those guidelines in the textbook about doing good interviews. Then we want to use records. We use court records because it's public information. Emails and texts, you can ask for them. Press releases are a good start, although we all know that press releases have biases. They're being put out either by the government or by the company. But you can use information from them, but you also want to go to the other side of the press release and find that information as well. Internal memos, we see these get leaked from Facebook and Google all the time. We can use that as a document. All information from public institutions is public. If police don't want to give you a police report, which happens a lot, or if CCP doesn't want to release part of its budget, because those are publicly funded institutions, meaning they take taxpayer money, you can file a Freedom of Information Act request to get that information. For example, I once wanted, the superintendent's credit card records to see how much they were spending when they were going, with a city-issued credit card. I had to file a Freedom of Information Act, and I got that information, and I found out how much they paid for parking, restaurants. Actually, this superintendent was actually pretty good. There was no story there, but I had to file the Freedom of Information Act to get the information. Ethics, right? It is imperative that as a journalist you follow the ethical guidelines of the profession. Always identify yourself as a reporter. Always identify the institution you work for. Always check your facts. Never falsify information or sources, and then avoid plagiarism at all costs. We've seen a lot of very high-profile journalists lose their job because they didn't attribute information to the source that they got it from. Now, you can use other articles. You can use academic papers as long as you attribute them, as long as you cite them like you would in a 101 or 102 paper. But this is also a last resort. Good reporters don't rely on previous reporting. They rely on their own reporting. So if you need to add a fact or a statistic that comes from some other story, you can do it, but it's better for you to actually go to the direct source and get it yourself. Now the backpack journalist. We were once just writers. For example, when I went to Temple as an undergrad for journalism, I had to specify that I wanted to be a newspaper reporter, right? Somebody else, my friend, decided to become a magazine reporter. Another friend wanted to go into radio. Another friend wanted to go into television, right? And there were different programs for that. Now there's one big program because a newspaper isn't just a newspaper. A newspaper has podcasts, a newspaper has video, etc. So we are becoming what's called a backpack journalist. And this is a term coined by Nicholas Kristof at the New York Times about 10 years ago. It means that we carry all the tools necessary to write, take photos, videos, content, collect audio, and publish it. We carry a studio in our pocket with our phone, right? We can produce an entire audio, video story right from our pockets. So we need to know how to write for all those forms, how to produce those forms. Because sometimes I used to travel with a photographer back in the days of film. Like I didn't take pictures, right? Of course, now if I was a reporter, you're expected to take pictures. Right? Not to say we don't have professional photographers, we still do, but a lot of times you're expected to take your own video, photos, and audio. All right. So that's the media environment. The media environment is a great environment, usually, depending on where you work. But it's dynamic, it's changing, it's exciting, and I hope that we can kind of recreate that environment in this class. And I really hope as professionals that you get to work in that environment because it's one of the best things you can do. All right, email me if you have any questions and keep up the good work.